All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nick Kalyani. I'm the co-founder and CEO of TryCrypto. And today's webinar is Go with the Flow, a decentralized app journey. And our goal today is to tell you a little bit about DappStarter, our product for helping developers build decentralized apps very rapidly and easily. And we are very, very excited to share for the first time Flow integration with DappStarter. This is a brand new integration. It is, in fact, we were working on it right down to about 2 minutes ago. So it's currently in preview. So let's talk a little bit about our webinar today and the topics we're going to cover. So first and foremost, I want to make sure that everyone's aware that this is going to be mostly a sort of hands-on webinar. I'm going to be looking at a lot of code, etc. Have just a handful of slides, and then we're going to go into code. So I'm very excited about that. In terms of our vision for DappStarter and Flow, one of the key things is that we greatly respect that Flow has been designed for creators. And we want to make sure to respect that. And so all that you see here, our vision and how we are executing and going about it is keeping in line with that. What you're seeing today here is our first integration with Flow. There's going to be a lot more work that's going to happen over the coming weeks. And we invite you to be part of this journey. So in the webinar today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about DappStarter, about how it works. I'm going to tell you also about the resources you need in order to develop for Flow using DappStarter. And then we're going to actually build a project and look at the underlying code and how exactly you would modify it, etc., to make it your own. The next thing we'll also talk about is a Dapp that we are going to be building for the course of the month of July. As I mentioned, it's kind of like a journey. As Flow evolves and things get more improved and into production, etc., we want to keep improving DappStarter and adding more capabilities to it. And we thought the best way to do that is to also, in parallel with you, build our own Dapp and share our experience with you through blogs, through screencasts, and perhaps even more webinars like this. So today, we'd like to talk about what that Dapp is that we're going to build, give you the vision for it, and also give you a sneak peek at something that I think you're going to really, really like. I'm certainly excited, as are all the team members at TryCrypto, and I hope you will share that excitement. After that, we'll chart a course for what's coming next and how we're going to go ahead and get DappStarter and Flow as it goes mainstream, to keep up with it and what we're going to do on there. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some questions. I want to make sure to thank, first of all, before we begin, the Flow team for organizing this. I really appreciate it. And I also want to thank my co-founder, Chase Chapman, who is doing moderation duty today. So she's going to take your questions and moderate them and share them with me as appropriate. All right, so that's the intro. Let's get going. So for those of you who don't know, DappStarter is a full stack application generator. It's designed to be blockchain agnostic, and it's designed to have a rich feature set. The basic workflow in DappStarter is you select a blockchain, and then you choose features. They're sort of like Lego blocks. We call them feature modules, and we organize them into categories. The idea is that each of these features represents a design pattern in software that you would want to implement in your Dapp. So we think quite carefully before we incorporate one of these as a feature module. I'll give you a good example. The one that's highlighted there is a contract run state. That's something where if you have a Dapp and you don't necessarily want it to be fully autonomous and you want the ability to turn it on or off, essentially pause it, that's a good thing to have in case there's lots of money going through and you discover some vulnerability and you want to pause things so you can take a step back and look at what's going on. So that's the kind of design pattern that's implemented. So that's a pretty simple one, but there's more complicated ones. For example, with Flow, we have elected to go with a basic NFT feature block, and that's what we're going to share today. So currently, we started off DappStarter with support for Ethereum. Flow is the very first non-EVM-based blockchain that we've added. So we've been tinkering with our platform quite a bit. And so that might show today when things sometimes might blow up. Hopefully not, we'll keep our fingers crossed. But after you've done making these choices, what happens is DappStarter will generate for you the full stack source code for the Dapp. This includes the smart contract. It also includes the web UI, unit tests, and server API. So those are all the things that DappStarter gives you. Our goal is not to give you sort of a ready-to-use app, although it can be. Our goal is to save you time and get you to about 80% of the way, so that you can then focus on just adding your special magic to make it your special app. Everything in the app that's produced is open source and MIT licensed. And it's not to give you sort of a ready-to-use app. Although it can be. From someone. Our goal is to save you time and get you to please mute everybody of the way, so that you can then focus on just adding your special magic. All right, great, thank you. So everything is MIT licensed, so once you get the source code, you can do anything you want with it. All right, so that's DappStarter. You can learn about it at trycrypto.com/DappStarter, and from there you can link to the app. So now what I want to do is talk a little bit about the Flow resources you're going to need. And thankfully, it's not much. It's very simple. You basically need to install the Flow CLI. So Flow has done a great job with all the documentation that's there. There's copious amounts of it, lots of examples, etc. So getting this CLI on your computer gives you the ability to run an emulator. It also allows you to add a Visual Studio extension if you wish, for code highlighting and such. So it's really a very useful CLI, and you need to probably make that your first step before you start building for Flow. All right, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get out of the this browser here and switch over to here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over into DappStarter. And as I mentioned, we've just integrated this here today. So let's see how well it works. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Flow. And notice that when I chose Flow, my language changed to Cadence. So Cadence is the default and currently only language supported by Flow. So having made those choices, I can now choose the framework I want to use. Remember, DappStarter generates full stack source code. So what we are going to do is choose between vanilla or React. I'm going to go with vanilla. And actually, although this says material design for Bootstrap here, we have switched to Tailwind CSS. So it's going to be all Tailwind CSS based output that you have. And again, you can change that. As you know, we try and not be opinionated. In fact, you'll find as we go through the source code here that everything is just web components. So it's fairly easy for you to use any framework you choose. This being the intro, we have just one feature available for Flow. I just want to switch to Ethereum to show you some of the other features, and we'll switch back then. But you can see that there's lots of other capabilities, and in very short order, within the month of July, you'll start seeing a lot of these capabilities being ported over and working with Flow. We are a bit careful to make sure that we just don't port everything over. We want to have features that really take advantage of the particular blockchain and make its features shine. So let's go ahead and choose a basic fungible token. We'll choose test. Just create a. Okay, there we go. So it's a bit finicky, as I mentioned. Sorry about that. But here's what happens. You essentially get a GitHub repo that is created explicitly and exclusively for the project options that you selected. So I'm going to go ahead and go to that GitHub repo. Now, GitHub sometimes takes a minute or 2 minutes before it refreshes. So don't be alarmed if you go here and it's an empty repo. Just refresh and you'll see that it'll show up very quickly. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And what I'm going to do now is kind of switch my browser. So we are going into a sort of split screen mode. So let's put this over here. Actually, I can get rid of this one here. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and clone this repository and get rid of some of the other windows here. All right. So let's go ahead and do a git clone. I'll zoom that up a bit. That's too much. And we'll do git clone and clone that repo. Okay, great. And let's go ahead and open it and we'll find it right there. All right, so this is the source code that was generated for us by DappStarter. We use a mono repo and we use learner to manage it. You will find here a bunch of packages. And I'm going to go through all of these in a bit. And there's also something called workspace. But before I start describing those, let me go ahead and get this the dependencies installing. So for that, I type yarn, which is what we use. And that's going to go ahead and do that. All right, so let's look at these packages. So the first one here is the client UI. So we're going to be spending some time exploring this, but basically you can see the Tailwind reference here. And what you can also see is that there are a number of components. Two of these are, we're going to talk about quite a bit, action button and action card. One of the things we are trying to do with DappStarter is abstract away a lot of the complexity of the blockchain for you, so that at least when you're beginning, you can very easily work with things. And then when you don't want those components, you can work around them. So there's a bunch of UI components there. We also have this library project, and that's really the centerpiece of the project that's there, because that's where you have your contracts, and that's where you have library source code we generate. And two important files here, blockchain.js and dapplib.js. So we've architected DappStarter so that when we add support for a new blockchain, we kind of have this layer, blockchain.js, and that is the only abstraction layer. Everything that's specific to that particular blockchain is going to be in blockchain.js. And from there on, everything is sort of common to all blockchains, with the exception of the contracts. So it looks like the dependencies are done. Let's go ahead and get this going with yarn start. Now, one of the things I want to mention is that we have an internal goal that from the time that someone goes to the DappStarter website and generates their project to the time that they see the Dapp first in their browser, that threshold, that duration should be no more than 15 minutes. So I'm talking here and describing things, but if you just go ahead and do this, you'll see that you can get well under that threshold. So there's a lot of things that are going to happen here. Looks like there was an error. So we might have to go to plan B here for a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my backup here. So the generator that runs in order to produce this is called Hypergraph. It's a custom engine we have created. And I have the ability to essentially bypass the whole UI and run Hypergraph directly on my computer. And that's what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to go ahead and tell it to generate a new project for me for Flow. So it's going to go ahead and do that. And meanwhile, over here, I'm going to switch over to the other project. So, and that's right here. All right, so this is the output project that just got generated. Actually, you know what? I want to show you that it actually does work. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and delete this and regenerate it. And you'll see that, there we go. So the files just show up there. And now we can try this again. And hopefully the demo gods will be kinder to me this time. All right, so we get the dependencies done. It shouldn't take too long. And while it's doing that, I want to talk also about these other packages. So the workspace is kind of like a sort of pseudo IDE, if you will. We wanted to make sure that in the browser, you have a nice environment in which you can work with your Dapp. And so we've built this workspace for that. All right, so let's now go yarn start. So what's happening here is that the process here is going to start and launch the Flow emulator. It is going to create user accounts, as you're seeing right now. I'm going to scroll back through these and kind of talk a little bit about what's happening. But this is what should have happened earlier. It's basically compiled everything. It's run Webpack. It's generated the UI, and it's created the whole environment. And there you go. So that's what we should have seen earlier. And I apologize that the live thing on the server is not working. We'll get that fixed ASAP. But what you do yarn start, and that's really all you need to do in order to get your app running. I should say Dapp running. So in addition to this this IDE, I'm just going to talk a little bit about it briefly, but we're going to focus more on the code in the main window here. So what we do is we create this single page here, which is intended to be the page you're going to modify and add your UI to. Of course, you can add as many pages as you want, and you can do anything else you want also, but we wanted to give you a head start. One of the biggest challenges when you're developing is how do you exercise and test some of the code you're working with without actually writing all the unit tests and building a UI, etc. So we had this great idea that for every feature block that you choose in the DappStarter UI, we create a UI test harness for you. So here's a UI test harness for the basic non-fungible token. Now this is not complete. This is, as it says here, currently in development, and we've just put these here so that I could demonstrate things like action cards and things like that. So we'll be working with this in just a bit. But this is one benefit of using DappStarter is when you choose those blocks, you get a ready-made UI, and you can put this UI into production, modify it as you wish, but it's really intended to be a UI test harness first and foremost. We also, as I mentioned, are full stack, and so we generate a package for you that is a server API, so you can your Dapp can respond to events, etc. And for that, we also generate a Swagger kind of test environment. So right now I don't have a whole lot on there. So let's just go ahead and look at all these things that happen with yarn start, because there's quite a bit to unpack here before we start making some changes. So one of the first things that that happens is I'll draw your attention to this part here. Actually, I'm going to move my browser for a little bit to the center here, so it's a little easier for you to see. But the first thing that's happening here is that DappLib is starting off the emulator for Flow. And so that's kicking off here. And it listens by default on port 3569. That's the RPC server. And there's also an HTTP server listening on port 8080. So once that happens, the next thing that DappStarter code does is it creates some test accounts for you. And you can see those being generated here. Now, in blockchains like Ethereum, for example, you don't really need to sort of register with the blockchain. The accounts, as long as you have a private key, they exist. But one of the differences between other blockchains and Flow is that your accounts need to be created on the blockchain. And the other difference is that each account can have a number of public keys. So it's not limited to to 1. If you recollect, in Ethereum, the address or the account is derived from the public key, which is derived from the private key. That's not the case here. The address, and if I'm not mistaken, the address format is still in flux, and it might change. But the basic thing that you care about the most here is the public key, and each account can have more. So what we like to do here in DappStarter is generate a number of accounts for you so that you can test with real world data. So sometimes it's very tempting as a blockchain developer to use shortcuts on that. What we discovered that if your data, especially things like addresses, etc., is as real as possible, then it helps with the UI, because what might happen is you might test your UI with like a very simple one-digit number, but then the moment your users start using it, they are confronted with 16-digit numbers, and it looks god-awful at that point. So we want to encourage people to use as real data as possible, and that's why we generate these accounts. So the next thing that you see here is actually a problem I discovered this morning. Is the contract that is being generated is being rejected by the blockchain. It's saying computation limited exceeded. So that obviously means that there is some threshold that it has crossed. I was just chatting with the Flow engineers just before this call, and we are going to try and figure out what that's about. But not to worry, we can still look at the source code that was generated for us and go over that. So I'm going to be looking at that in just a moment. All right, so that's all that happened here. And then everything that you see here that says client, that's essentially Webpack being kicked off, minifying things, etc. And it is set up to hot load. So I will demonstrate that here. So that's a nice thing about the development environment, that as you're working on things, you can just change it. So for example, if you don't like the title of a page, or you want to make some changes, etc., you can just do it very easily. So let's say I want to change this to account demo. I save that, and you'll see that the hot loading works, and right away it changes there. So it makes for a really pleasant development experience. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to work our way from the bottom, which is a smart contract, way up to the UI, and learn about some of the capabilities of DappStarter and Cadence in the process. So as I mentioned earlier, the contracts are right here. Here is the CDC file. So that's a Cadence file. Cadence is the language, and this was generated by DappStarter. What DappStarter does is it intelligently stitches together the code from various feature blocks you've chosen. And it's not just a matter of essentially copy pasting, if you will, programmatically, because it does handle dependencies and things like that. So what you're seeing here is a slight modification of an example contract that you will find in the Flow documentation. It's for an NFT where the actual token identifier is an integer. So one of the main things we've done here is we've added some metadata and made the NFT key a string. So there's a score here and there's an emoji. So these are two pieces of metadata, which I'm going to explain to you in a little bit when we talk about our NFT Dapp project. But as you can see here, the language syntax is sort of C-like. So it's, but it's definitely it takes a little getting used to. And because of some of the opinionated choices that are made in the language design, and I think they're very good opinionated choices, but it does take a lot of mental energy initially to get to the point where you can, okay, I get it. That's a resource, that's an interface, and so on and so forth. So since this is a very short webinar, 1 hour, I don't want to get into too much detail about it, but I do want to say the documentation is excellent on the OnFlow website. You should check it out. But what we've got here is by making that choice of the NFT block, we've got all the source code for the NFT in here. And as you can see, it's everything that you would have in an NFT-based thing. For example, you want to withdraw a token, you want to deposit a token, etc. It also has the capability for an administrative user or a restricted user to mint a token and assign it. So one of the things that initially I found strange, but now I kind of am used to it, is this little syntax here with the backward pointing arrow. So as you will learn as you get deeper into Flow is a resource-based language. And in order to prevent errors and minimize security risks, all resources in Flow can only exist in one place at any given time. So the architecture and of the Flow blockchain and the language, they work harmoniously to make that happen. And I really like that capability. It's a little tricky to get used to, but after a while, it kind of grows on you. The other thing you'll see is that it is strongly typed. So that's obviously true of most blockchain languages. But so the source code is generated for you. At the moment, Cadence is not a compiled language, it is interpreted. That's because I believe the features are still evolving. And at some point, when it's more firmed up, I believe the plan is to take it to and make it into a compiled language. But right now, it is a interpreted language. And so what that means is that for you to deploy a smart contract is the same as doing any other transaction. You simply create a transaction and you send the code off to the blockchain. But that's where things get a little tricky, because in the Flow blockchain, unlike Ethereum, etc., your code for your smart contract does not exist in isolation or by itself. A code belongs to an account and actually resides within the storage of an account. And what you do is you provide access, public access or restricted access to other users to that code within your account. So again, this is a fairly high level overview, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but that's once you have this generated for you by DappStarter, you can make all the changes you want. You know, this is all your source code to mess with, but our goal is to get you pretty far ahead. Now, so that's the sort of smart contract layer. And then the next layer that we have is the client layer. So there's unit tests, etc., but we haven't implemented unit tests yet for Flow. That's going to come a little later. So we'll focus on the client. So this is the part that I like the most, because it takes a fair bit of work to create a good UI. And what we've done here is created a framework for you without, and I say framework loosely, it's not a sort of an opinionated thing. It's just a scaffolding, maybe a better word, to help you build your Dapp out. So the way it works is that there is a single page that's generated that corresponds to what is intended to be your Dapp's main canvas, where you do things. So you can work on that there. And then these are the individual test harnesses. Now, these are designed in such a way that it's very simple for you to move things from your test harness when you're ready to the main page. So let's say that we want to take something like this and we want to have that UI appear here. Well, that's pretty simple to do. So I'm going to go ahead and actually I'll add a div here and mimic what's 3, and we'll go ahead and paste that and save, and boom, we get that right away. So this makes it super simple for you to test things out and then go build it. So now what I want to do here is show you one of the features we've built here. So notice I said earlier that DappStarter adds accounts for you. Well, one of the things we're going to do is surface them in the UI test harness. Right now, you see it as an account dropdown with just one dropdown here. But one of the things you ought to be aware of is that in Flow, each transaction has multiple parties. There's first a proposer. So who is creating the transaction? It has to be signed by that account. Then there can be one or more authorizers. So who are the signers of who are approving the transaction? And finally, and this is a very separate and different and very exciting thing, there is a payer. So who's going to pay for submitting that transaction? So as you can see, the moment you take a step back and look at that architecture, you realize that this is designed from the ground up to make it super simple for users and to create a great user experience, because the friction of paying gas fees is what's really holding back a lot of dApps right now. It's because it's really hard to do it. And yeah, I know there's solutions like relays, et cetera, but none of them are as elegant as having the paying capability built right into the platform. And that's what I love about it. So what you're going to see here with our UI is we are going to make it simple during testing for you to simulate a proposer, multiple authorizers, and a pair, so you can see that experience and code that experience really well. But whatever accounts are generated here, they manifest themselves directly into the UI. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to choose this, and now you'll see that there's two buttons here. There's a view button and there's a save button. So in most blockchains, there's essentially two ways in which you work with the blockchain smart contract. You can either read data, or you can change the state of the blockchain by posting data. So we manifest those as view and save, but you can change that also. So what I'm going to do here is just query the blockchain right now for this account. And we'll do that, and we got back some data. So part of what we do here is we have a bunch of formatters and viewers so that when you're working with data during development, you don't have to do console log. You can actually look at data interactively, et cetera. You can copy things easily. They're all wired up. So we do that all the time, right? You want to copy something and then paste it onto the next transaction, et cetera. So all of that is handled for you by DappStarter. So throughout the experience, you'll find that there's little things we've done like, oh, this is an annoyance for a developer. Let's see how we can fix that. And yes, there's room for improvement always in terms of the UI, etc., and we'll keep doing that. But we wanted to start somewhere, and so that's what we are doing. So when I click the view button, it went and fetched this for me. So how did that happen? Well, all of these the basic experience of these pages is around two pieces of data, well, rather code components. One is called an action card. So what an action card does is encapsulate one particular function within your smart contract. That's the intent. It doesn't have to be that way. So what it will do is give you the ability to declaratively specify, what the fields are. And we have a bunch of widgets. For example, there's an account widget that automatically loads up all the addresses, et cetera, for you. There's number widgets, et cetera. They're sort of helpers, but you could just use an input tag here, and if you wanted to, that's up to you. But what the action card does is allow you to simply specify what's the function. Is it a get or a post? So we're using sort of RESTful language here, where we say, we know it's not REST, but we want to use terms that are familiar with web developers, because that's who we see really taking up Dapp development in big numbers. And so we're trying to make it easier for them. So your method would be a get or a post. And then what are the fields you want to send along? And so the fields would be whatever you've added here. So if you want to add another field, you would just kind of add another widget here, like a number widget, or like here's a number widget, there's a text widget, etc. And then what the action card does is it intelligently figures out how to format the data for this method. It passes it on there, it gets back the result, and it displays it with a formatter. So during development, if you want to quickly start testing, this is great. All of this is tied back to a DappLib. Now we designed the DappLib, actually I'm in the wrong package there, it's this one here. We designed DappLib so not only could you use it for your web projects, but if you wanted to throw up an Electron desktop app, or if you wanted to use it in sort of a React Native environment, etc., you could do that also. So DappLib is the last frontier between you in terms of your web application and the blockchain. So DappLib communicates and makes calls to blockchain, and that's how all the actual interactions happen. So nowhere in your code, other than in blockchain.js, will there be anything specific to the blockchain. So everything is just abstracted over here. And right now, blockchain.js is a bit of a mess because we are trying to figure things out. We still haven't quite mastered the capabilities of multiple signers, etc. So it's not as nice as we would like it to be, but it will get there. We are learning along with building this at the same time. So it's fun, but sometimes it gets a little challenging, I must say. So all right, so DappLib is, I want to share with you the actual function that I call here. So that's get account info. And you'll notice here that the action was get account info. So that's how the connection is made between sort of the action card and the DappLib here. And so it takes your data, it passes it on, it calls blockchain, it gets results, and it immediately updates it. So that's, in a nutshell, the workflow. So what I want to do now is tell you a little bit about where this is headed. So basically, as of today, once our preview is working, which hopefully we'll get it debugged and operational here in the next hour or so, or maybe less, what we want to do is keep evolving the NFT feature block and finish wiring up all the functions that are in the contract right now to the front end. So you can mint, you can withdraw, you can do all of those kinds of things. So that's coming up. So this is an iterative process. Expect to see updates from us regularly. And a little later, I'm going to share our my Twitter handle and our TryCrypto Twitter handle. Please follow us there because you will want to see some of these updates. They're very exciting. Now, let's head back to our presentation deck here. So I can talk a little bit about how we are going to make that app I was talking about happen. So I mentioned earlier that we wanted to build a Dapp in parallel with building out the features of the NFT feature block. And so for that, what we are doing is we are introducing something that we are calling Project Mondrian. So what is that? Well, Flow is for creators. And what we want to do is with Project Mondrian, we want you to take you on a journey to learn Flow and Cadence and grow with us, but in a very creative and exciting way. So there's a picture here. Most of you have seen it. You're probably very familiar with it, but you might not know a lot about the artist or the background behind it. So this is the style created by a very famous Dutch artist called Piet Mondrian. And I happen to be a fan of this art, not only because of its aesthetic appeal, etc., but I happen to teach kids software development and especially CSS. And this is a great way to have kids learn CSS by creating these kind of structures. And I thought, well, why don't we take it to the other extreme, and instead of just focusing on CSS, why don't we make this into NFTs? So what I'd like to introduce with Project Mondrian is the ability to create unique, distinct, Piet Mondrian inspired artworks as the NFT assets, as the NFT token. Each one is rendered programmatically based on this string you see here. So that string on the bottom is actually encoding this whole picture, and I'm going to show you here in a minute. In addition, when we were looking at the source code for the NFT token, you saw a score. So based on the visual complexity of this, it's automatically assigned a score. And so the ones with higher visual complexity or more interesting visual complexity have a higher score. And each one is automatically assigned an emoji. So those are just components we wanted to put there to showcase to you the capabilities of Flow and Cadence to use metadata with NFTs. And so what we want to do is create Mondrian as a way for you to use these and work with them. So let me show you what the work we've already done so far on that. So if you go right now to mondrian.com/demo, I'll show you the little, it's a work in progress, but we've already written an engine for generating these. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave it at the default and hit generate. And you can see that it's created a bunch of Mondrian. So each of them is a visually distinct NFT, and encoded within this string here is all the information. So in other words, the image itself, it's rendered in Canvas, but is not necessary to be stored anywhere. The string will be stored in the blockchain. Here's the scores that's generated for each one, and then there's the emoji for each one. So we've designed it so it scales beautifully. So you can make it smaller, or you can make it larger, and it's resolution independent. So we want to make these interesting for and have it so that it's an engaging kind of creative game and a collectible. In addition to that, we wanted to make it easy for developers to add their own variants. So all the color palettes here are changeable. You can make them whatever you want them to be. And you can also, we are adding some more quote unquote challenges that we want to give developers in enhancing this game. So you'll be hearing about that in the next week, and we might even have some prizes for some awesome variants. So stay tuned on that. So I just put together a few samples to show you the variety that's possible. Since this is algorithmically generated, you can also create variants. For example, I could imagine taking a square photo and morphing it into a Mondrian art by slicing it different ways. You can also add vector patterns, etc. So this is the app we are going to build. It's going to be Mondrian, and it'll be here at mondrian.com. Right now, this is just a placeholder, but if you want to play with this, it's mondrian.com/demo.html, and we'll share that link with you to play with. But I hope you guys will enjoy this journey we're going to go on in building this, because we have to go through the same experience you would about, okay, what are the rules? How do things work, etc. And so as we build this, it will make it easier for us to refine the NFT capabilities in DappStarter. All right, let's head back over here and talk about a little bit more here. So where are we in terms of DappStarter? So I just wanted to give you an update and let you know where things are going. So we've got the hypergraph integration done. As you saw, we've got account creation done. Contract deployment is kind of done, but we've got some issues with the blockchain we have to resolve. It might be something we could do, but it might also require an update to Flow. I'm not sure about that. We'll find out. The Flow emulator, rather. The NFT feature module is orange because it is a work in progress. We expect that it will be sometime mid-month where we will be sort of feature complete with the beta with it. And that really depends on the cadence of our development. So I had to throw in that joke there. All right, so we've also created the blockchain proxy layer. It's not great code right now, but it's there, and we'll continue to evolve it. So there's a lot more to do. We will work on the user interface, as I talked about. We'll work on the app. We are going to integrate our authentication. So we have a non-custodial wallet called PhotoKey. And I'll show you that momentarily, very briefly. And we're going to add unit tests, and we're going to add additional modules for Flow. So the NFT module is the first one, but we have plans for a lot more, and we'll be continuing to add those. So now, it's going to be a very busy July. We're going to be cranking out updates on DappStarter for Flow. We're going to be giving updates on Mondrian, etc. If you would, please follow these two Twitter accounts. There's TryCrypto, @TryCrypto, and myself, I'm at TechBubble. And that'll ensure that you hear about everything that's going on. we want to hear from you. We want to hear about any problems you're having. We want to hear about any ideas you have, your feedback, etc. So we just started up a support.trycrypto.com. We have a forum there. You can, if it's something that's private, you can open a trouble ticket. But if you don't mind, we want to start growing our community around Flow and DappStarter, so you can post in the forums there. All right, so let's now go to, oh, I said I would show you the photo key real briefly, so let me do that. So it's demo.photokey.org, and you can see here, we are going to add Flow to this also here. That should happen sometime next week. This is our blockchain agnostic solution for authentication, and it will be integrated directly into DappStarter, so you don't have to think about authentication a lot. That's one cool thing about Flow, is that it actually has the ability to automatically handle authentication by wallet, I guess discovery, but that might not be the right word, but it has a pretty sweet capability. But in any event, with PhotoKey, I'm signing into Ethereum right now, but you can sign into any blockchain. And what you do is you use emojis and a photo that you upload in order to authenticate. So these emojis give you about 140 quadrillion permutations. And so now I'm authenticated, and I can go here, and this is my Ethereum account, and we'll be adding that exact same capability for Flow shortly. So that's going to be integrated. And so this is a deterministically generated private key here. It is not stored anywhere. So there is nothing to lose, nothing to hack, because it works pretty seamlessly. So you can use the same photo key for different blockchains, and it just works. So you don't have to be managing different private keys and things like that. So here I am on Bitcoin. So this is our authentication solution. It conforms to OpenID Connect, and it uses the PKCE standard for the authentication. So great. Let's now switch back here. I'm going to leave this on the screen here, and let's start taking some questions. All right. Can you share the code highlighter plugin URL? That's interesting. Okay, so there might be two possibilities there, and both of those might be interesting to you. So the first thing is that when you install the Flow CLI, if you look in the documentation, there is a Visual Studio code extension. If you install that code extension, it will give you cadence syntax highlighting. So that's one thing. And for the general sort of coloring, etc., I usually use a very poorly named theme. It's called Neon Vomit. That's VOMMIT. So good luck with that. But if you want the cadence syntax highlighting, you need to install the Visual Studio extension, and that'll take care of it for you. All right, I have a Flow DappStarter question. In Ethereum, there is a notion of events/logs. Are there anything equivalent in Flow? So yes, there are definitely events in a Flow. And actually, you know, the architect in me wants to talk a little bit about it. If you think about blockchains, they are state machines. They have no capability to communicate with the outside world. And therefore, if there weren't events, it would be very difficult to create applications on blockchains that you could respond to. You would have to constantly poll and to see what's going on. But events make it easy. So Flow definitely has events, and we will wire them up via DappLib with the server API. So if you want to have a client-side Dapp, you can make it completely client-side and have it run on something like IPFS, Interplanetary File System. But when an event is generated, maybe a user signed in and it's time to mint an NFT or something like that, you could do it securely and privately on the server without revealing your private key or anything like that, because the event notification would get to you. There is logging, although I am not quite sure on where it's surfaced yet. But that's probably a good question to ask in the Flow Discord, which is quite active, and that's where your developer questions directly about Flow should go. All right. Next question is, will TryCrypto offer a repository of ready-to-deploy apps that users can easily tune a few variables and deploy to a simple marketplace? Well, that's a wonderful question. And if you think about it, the out-of-the-box experience with the feature modules that you have are in fact exactly that. I didn't show you, and let me just take a moment to do this here, is in DappStarter, you are not limited to just choosing these feature modules directly. They are actually able to have parameters. So if you see here, the custom token, you can provide a name, a symbol, etc. And so depending on the type of feature module you're choosing, it might have more options for you. And what we do is based on your choices, we actually either initialize variables or include or exclude entire sections of code so that the code you get is as close to what you want. You know, if you think about things like create React app, etc., they are mostly sort of binary, like you ask a question, yes, no. We wanted to go to the next level, and that's why we have parameter capability in every feature block and the ability for you to customize it. So given that, you should be able to create a near production grade sort of Dapp, and from there you can do, you know, put it on a marketplace, etc. As I mentioned, our threshold is about 80%, but that doesn't mean you can't take it as is and use it. The answer about like whether we would want to get into like templates, etc., is an unknown at this point. If there is demand, we'll certainly create that. But our philosophy is to really leave it to the community. So we've created this platform. It might be a good opportunity, just like, you know, Theme Forest and other sites like that, where developers could take that output, customize it for a vertical use case, and then offer it for sale. And I certainly would welcome the possibility in the very near term of us having a marketplace for things like that. So it makes it easy for people to do that. A question in the long run, going more to the truffle direction as dev tooling or abstracting away and coding like Wix or Webflow? That is a wonderful question. So for our EVM-based blockchains right now, we use Truffle. We love Truffle. We work with them very closely. They're a great team. And quite honestly, having done a lot of the tooling here for Flow in order to make it work well with DappStarter, I have a newfound respect for everything that's in Truffle. So salute to them and also to the Flow emulator. It's really awesome. So we like Truffle, and we'll continue to use it. And in fact, if Truffle starts supporting Flow, that's fine. We will continue to work with them. Our focus is developer-centric. We will always be developer-centric first because we are a developer-first company. But we are also realizing that there are technical business users, not technical business users, who are quite good with, maybe a little bit of HTML and things like that, but are not like hardcore developers. And we want to appeal to them also, but that might take the form of maybe adding more visual capabilities or theming capabilities within DappStarter. So you don't have to go with the generic out-of-the-box look. You might be able to add more visual capabilities. You might be able to add UI widgets, etc. It's all up in the air right now. We are focused right now on making it super simple for developers to build blockchain dApps. And we listen to our community. And if the direction is that if people want us to focus more on creating, ready-to-use apps, we'll do that. We do care very deeply about quality, and we do care about the engineering to make it efficient and not have bloated code, etc. So regardless of whether we end up having these themes, etc., you can be assured that the underlying architecture, the design patterns of the software and the code will be high quality. All right, next question is, what are you most excited about in terms of flow? Well, that is an easy one to answer. It's really Cadence more than flow itself. I spend a fair bit of time reading the Cadence documentation, and I really fell in love with it because having coded in lots of different languages, including Solidity, it's a breath of fresh air. Cadence is designed to make developers' lives easier, and so we don't have to think so much about the possible mistakes we could be making with security, with leaking things, etc., permissions, all of that kind of stuff. It's designed to protect us and our end users, and it's a very elegant architecture. So that's what I love most about Flow. I think the other thing that I would be remiss if I did not mention, because this is also our mission, is its user experience. TryCrypto is our sole mission is to make the blockchain user experience much, much better for mainstream users. And we realized early on that that is not going to happen until we empower developers. So we are starting with developers, but our goal is mainstream users. And you look at Flow, and that's kind of the same objective. It's about an emphasis and a focus on user experience so that the technology enables great user experiences, and it's not just an afterthought. And so that is something that I really love about Flow and the Flow team and their approach to creating a human-centric sort of blockchain application environment. All right, so we are at an hour. I thank you so much for taking your time here today to learn about DappStarter and Flow. I hope that this overview was useful to you. As I mentioned, it's the start of a journey, and we hope you'll come on that journey with us. I'm gonna throw up our contact info up here also. Please follow us, and we want to build great things. We want to empower you. We want to create the tools to have you build great things on the web and on Flow. So thanks so much, and enjoy the upcoming long weekend. Thank you so much.